My name is Emmanuel Gonzalez. I am 21 years old. I'm a JavaScript developer, and I am going to talk to you about this topic, which is called Mom, my uncle told me to make a monorepo. So maybe you will leave today with the idea that you will have to build a monorepo. So let's do this. So in the beginning, before entering in full in monorepos, when you start your path in programming, or perhaps some people have just graduated or people who have started working, and usually we begin with a project with a repository, which is simple enough. And for us, that project is equal to one repository. And for us, one repository is one project when we begin, and that project has its own way to do things, the way of deploying, to run tests, their own way of coding. So that's just the beginning of our career. So we begin with every repository in a single is one project. So this is one example. We have our simple web page. It's in one Git repository. And this is when we begin. Now time goes on and you begin to learn React. Like here, Homer is reading about documentation because otherwise he's going to be stuck. And we begin to learn more. So then we go on and we start to create more projects and more repositories. One project, one repository. And then we grow, and we are no longer at that stage in development. We are no longer beginners. And now we have more skills, you know, more languages, and you have more tools. So you have a problem, and that is that this problem, to introduce this topic of monorepos, somebody from earlier has worked in a project with, or in a lot of projects, and perhaps I'm spoiling this, but here is the problem. The problem is that let's suppose that somebody wants you to build a system, but everything from this system has a lot of projects, which means that we are going to have only one system, but we are going to have many projects. And we have always worked with one project and one repository. So we say, whoa, what we do now? So if there are 10 projects, if the client wants 10 projects, we need to create and maintain 10 repositories. We have some options. In our case, a monolith, to make one huge application where everything runs, and to have testing and everything, all the stages of the application and everything runs there. And we can have a lot of repositories, and you will have to maintain every repository at once with their different packages, their different rules. Perhaps not all of them follow the same standards because you have a lot of projects to maintain. And the idea is that the project comes out in the end. So perhaps you will waste a lot of time in configuration, setting up. This is an example, but perhaps your project is better suited for a monolith or for a multi-repo. So to know what we're going to have to do, we have a third option. This third option, and here we have this surprised Pikachu. Our third option is to create a monorepo. So what is a monorepo? That is one repository that contains a lot of projects, and it is not about mixing everything within one project, but the projects become independent. That is, that if, for example, a new developer enters the project in a monorepo, and they're a front-end developer that is going to work in the administration area, this person can download the repository with all the projects. And if they're only going to work in administration or management, they're only going to compile the project, the management project, without having to run the entire project, because it may be very heavy you can have even 10 projects, 10 packages, or a lot. Google may have like 100 in one repository, and they don't have anything to do with each other. And the cool thing here is that the Monorepo is highlighting one application. We're going to see this later, but it's about having multiple applications, services, libraries that belong to a domain within one repository. And as an argument, this is not just for one framework or language. This may work in other languages. This would be a work architecture, a teamwork architecture, or Git architecture. So to talk about monorepos, we're going to talk about the difference between a monolith and a monorepo in case that someone in the chat has this question. The monolith is an application that is very big. And in it, we have everything compiled, front end, back end, all the micro front ends. And at the end, when you are developing, you have to compile all the applications to see the change. So at some point in the future, it's going to become slow, or you take longer to make a change because it takes more to compile. And with a monorepo, as I explained earlier, there are a lot of projects and each project compiles independently. So we do not have so much load for our computer. And if we do not have a very powerful computer, we can still work in our simple applications without having to compile the entire project. Because it happens, for example, in Ruby on Rails or Django, where you have to run Postgres and Reddit, and you have to have everything installed. And if you have Windows, then you will not be able to, or it's going to be harder to run this project. So, and if you are only a front end and you enter into your applications, you will only compile the applications you're going to use. And this is the difference between those two. And now we have the multi-repo and the monorepo. There are several ways to name these multi-repos. I have seen them as polyrepos, many repos, but at the end, it is the same. It's the idea of having several repositories, and each is one system, and they are connected among each other at the end. At the end, they will deliver a product. So if we are working on front end, what happens if our application needs the same styles in project 1 and project 2? And besides that, we need things from project 1 and project 2, and we can be reusing those. So perhaps communication among those are not very good, and code is repeated. So maintaining 10 different packages is quite something. So it's not as simple as that. And Monorepo is what I already explained, which is everything is inside the same repository and applications can be connected among each other. And we are going to see a clear example of how this works. Here I have a more graphic version of how to differentiate this. The monolith is one repository, one project, the backend, front end, and the multi-repo has a lot of projects and different repositories for each. And the monorepo, which is like joining of these projects together in one repository. And this would be the workflow of the monorepo. That would be, we have different teams in the same monorepo. We have the Rails team, the front-end team, and the iOS team. And all these teams converge in the same repository. And now you can know what your Rails teammate is doing or the iOS teammate is doing, because you are all going to be working the same repository with all of them. And it's not going to be per project, but it's going to be a lot of projects. And you can know what everyone else is doing. And maybe I think that for example, 2 front-end developers are working and some back-end developer is made a mistake, and since everything is centralized, development may be easier, and the code can be seen as developed by one person, because when we develop, our goal is, or should be, that the code looks like it has been developed by many people, but it was actually developed by many people. So we can control this part with a monorepo. And what are the benefits of a monorepo? So we can manage dependencies easier. For example, in JavaScript, we can share dependencies among projects and manage them globally. For example, if we're going to have just front-end monorepos, the React dependency can be managed in one package and the rest of the packages do no longer have React. This among other libraries that you can use. Another benefit is the all-in-one for lint and build and test and release everything in the same place without having to, every time you create a new project, installing Lint or Husky or testing or everything. And it gives you access to all parts of the system. So perhaps if you are curious how the management part is built, you can go in, install, and see how it's made. Or maybe you need an example that was already made in management, and you can go and see it. And you can perform E2E testing among systems. And that way you can run tests among systems to see that everything runs when changing systems, if that is the case. And we can use atomic changes if the client asks us that, for example, if I want this pink button, but now I want it blue, well, we just go to one place and change it there. So we can change that quickly, and in one place modifies everything. And we can do that in many areas, in texts, interactions, buttons. All the design part can be done like this, and you can do it in the backend, because in the monorepo, the backend can also be there. And of course, the part of reusing code, which is basically that we can share, for example, components, strips, or utilities, everything that we need to, that we can use, so that we don't have to repeat code. And here we have another topic, because perhaps some of you may ask, how does this continuous integration, continuous delivery work in a monorepo? So in a monorepo, something was developed by GitHub, which is called GitHub Actions. And with this, we can deploy and make continuous integrations only with the package that was developed, not to all the application, because to make continuous application to an application that is going to be very expensive in terms of resources. So we can just, from this folder that was modified, you are going to make this interaction. So only testing and deployment. And deployment can only be made from one package. We don't need to deploy our entire application. Of course, this part, if you're going to implement one monorepo, you have to talk about it with a DevOps you can trust, because if you're going to implement it in your company or where you're working, you have to check that it works, because the DevOps is going to check that with you as a tip. And here we have an example of how this process works. We have the monorepo, and from the monorepo, the backend and frontend projects go, and continuous integration and continuous delivery are going to only be about building and testing and backing, and only this part, which is the backend. And at the end, if everything goes well, it's going to be independent in the server. And if you have a small application, testing is going to be faster instead of testing the entire system. And Something else that you can do with deployment from a monorepo is that you can have several deployments to subdomains. In this case, we have the website, the application, and the documentation. And if you can see in the screen in the right part, each different project goes to a different subdomain from the main domain, which is company. So you can do that as well. If you're interested in subdomains, you can manage each subdomain as a project. And there is the part of sharing images and icons. And what technologies can I use for monorepos in JavaScript? So we have these, which are the best known, which are Lerna, PNPM, NX, and Rush. Each has a goal and each has pros and cons. And at the end of the day, each technology to create or manage a monorepo will have its drawbacks or its advantages. And they solve one problem. And it may be that Lerna is better suited to the problem that you want to solve, or PNPM can do that. So if you're going to begin with a monorepo for a project, I recommend that you would check the different parts of each and you can see which is better suited to your project so that in the future you don't have to migrate from one technology to another. You can have this research and perhaps you can see that NX is going to work better for your projects. This is one example of a monorepo, and you can see that it's more graphic. It's a front-end monorepo, and we have 3 applications. We have one blog, one shop, and shared components between the two. So in the main part of the project, we have shared modules that are global for applications. And you can see that we have tools such as Husky, Slint, and Prettier so that we can manage all the code of our project with the rules to share rules, and the code looks like only one person created it. The Husky to make pre-commits and everything that it's about, and you can share all these dependencies in the entire project. And in the blog, you have this part with React, and you have the shop, which is made with Next. I don't know for what reasons, perhaps for SEO, and the shared folder between the blog and the shop. So maybe I should clear out this tool about sharing this. This is pre-compiled. We will see that in the example that I have. You do not necessarily have to pull it from the route, but you need to compile it and the monorepo will do its thing. And you can just grab the component which is pre-compiled like a library. Now we are going to do this example because this is what you want to see if you have never seen a monorepo. This is a very basic example. I made it with Lerna because this, for me, this is the most simple way to do it. And the idea here is not to see something too advanced, but that you know that monorepos exist and that if one day they may save you, or you can use one, or you can start one. So let's go to the code. This is the part or the structure of our project where we have administration, APIs, the shared libraries, and the website. And we have 3 different applications and the shared applications. So applications, we can get them up at the same time, which we're going to use. I'm going to get these applications up at the same time. And perhaps you need to run them each one at a time. And here it says that our 3 applications are being run. And while they load, we see here that we have our administration, which is an SPA with React. And here it says that everything is ready. We have our API, which is a very basic API. It just returns this text. And it says, I am at JSConf Mexico. And the third is an application, which is not compiled yet. So while it compiles, we are going to check the admin. So it's basically the project. If you take it from Git React App, which is the SPA, the API is too basic. I just return, I am at JSConf, and the website is the one from Gatsby. So we're going to check it. It compiled already. So if you can see that I have the 3 applications running, but what happens if I just want to work in the API? So we are going to run yarn start and compile only the admin application. In this case, it's going to only run the API application, and the only applications, if I try to go in, they are not going to be running. Only the admin application is going to be up, and I can only work in the admin part. And this part of how to run the application is just pure Lerna configuration with other monorepos. It must have its own configuration to work on a project. And here, when you run start :admin, please run scope admin start. And what happens with our shared components? I created a header called JSConf Mexico 2022, and I am using it in the website. So let's run the website. And while it runs, this is a basic component. So if we go to the website and go to the package JSON of the website, something else I didn't mention is that each application may have their own libraries. In one, you can have some libraries, and in others, no. And in the yarn log dependencies, in the package dependencies, we can see that our shared component was installed, or shared library. So if you see here, this library is the pre-compiled library created by Lerna internally. It is not the address of the file. And it's right here. I can compile another component and I just call it because it is right there. So I call it as if it was a library, as if I had installed it. And I pull the header. And we have here the Gatsby. And something else that the Monorepo does is that if I change something from the header, for example, if I take the Mexico away, we will see it in real time in the library that we pre-compiled. So it's very cool. It helps us develop. We can use the same component in the React app, and you can use 2 components which are the same. I mean, one component in 2 different places, and that has an impact in both sides. And are you ready to create your first Monorepo? I think that this is all from me. Truth is that Monorepos perhaps are for large projects, but if you are starting, I recommend that you look them up and start practicing, because you will not waste your time by knowing about this.